South Hills, I'm so excited to share with you all the great things that God has been doing through our church this year. We've had over 48 people take the next step in their journey in their relationship with God and be a part of our Discover class, which is an opportunity for someone to get to know who we are as a church, what we believe in. The other thing that I'm excited to share with you is the amount of people who have stepped out in faith and have trusted God with their finances and started to tithe. And so this year so far, we've had 140 people step out in faith and believe God's word and believe God's promises. The next thing I want to share with you, we've had 267 people say yes to Jesus for the very first time in their life. And we are so excited to come alongside of them. And to all of our campuses, we've had 456 kids come to church for the very first time. That is unbelievable. God is moving through our church. We are seeing families come together, be bonded, grow in their marriages, seeing kids listen to the word of God for the very first time. And I just also want to take a moment. A few weeks ago, I asked you to step out in faith and join us in a movement that we were partnering with Jacaranda Housing. I said for every dollar that we gave towards Above and Beyond, that money would be dedicated towards helping Jacaranda Housing do what God has called it to do. We as a church raised $9,986 to support that movement. I want to say thank you, South Hills Church, for believing in God, for coming alongside of us, for having a generous heart, allowing yourself to make a difference in not only what we're doing here as a church, but what we're doing in communities.
Into the ring.
Thank you for joining us here at South Hills today. My name is Adam, if I haven't met you. If I have the same name, I didn't lie to you when we met. But I am the campus pastor here at our South Hills Corona campus. And today we're in the middle of this series that we started back at the beginning of May called Defeating Depression, about how to deal with your dark side. And sort of this idea of giving you some practical tools and tactics to fight hopelessness in life, no matter where you might be on that spectrum. We started this a couple weeks ago, and I want to encourage you, if you haven't heard any of these messages, to go back and catch up. Whether you're listening online or on YouTube or catching our podcast. But today's going to make sense, even if you didn't hear the first two or see the first two. I think what is happening in this series and the things that we're talking about, this is a lot of ground to cover, and we can't possibly say everything there is to be said just during these few short weeks. But I do think that there is something in every single one of these weeks that can not only help you, but somebody that you know and love and care about. And we want to be a resource to you in that way. And so today, I want to encourage you to take some notes for your sake and for someone else's, to write down some things or to type some things into your phone that might be useful for you going away from here to talk about, to resource the people in your life. And if you are taking notes, the title of my message today is, Can We Be Done? Can we be done? Both my boys play soccer and have for quite a while now. They just got finished with their soccer season. They've got like one more tournament left, but the actual proper season is over, and they both had an incredible season, and they've been playing for a really long time. And so we've gone through like all the iterations of all the different soccer things and complications. And one of the things that if your kids play soccer, the season always ends with a Graziano's pizza party. I don't know how that started, but it is a thing that you do. And also that like soccer games mean a lot of soccer practices and a lot of smelly cleats in the car. There is nothing that smells more like death than a shin guard off a little boy who's been playing really hard for a couple hours and then just left it rotting in a bag in your car. Thanks, kids. But I have this really vivid memory from a couple years ago when Zeke first started playing, and we're like, and I don't know if your kids are like this, but we're like, is he really going to stick with this? Because he tried some different things. And so we got him these cleats that were like hand-me-downs from someone else. And every single time we got ready to go to practice, we would have this fight with him. And he would wait till the very last minute, and we'd be like, get on your cleats, get on your cleats. He'd finally start putting on the cleats, and then he'd be like, nah, it's not working. It's not working. We're like, well, it's not working. It's a shoe. You know how to put on shoes. He's like, no, there's something weird about these shoes. I don't know. And we're just like, oh, we got to go. Like the other kids are in the car. They're like, we're going to be late. And we're trying to hustle them out the door. And I'm just like, come on, let's go. And I would tie them real quick and just rush. And then the whole way there, he's just like, it doesn't feel right. I don't like these shoes. We're like, we'll get to it. We'll deal with it. And we never did. We just kept moving on. We had stuff to do. You know what I mean? And maybe some of you are in this stage of life where you're like, it's going from one thing to the next thing from the next thing. And that's sort of what this stage of life was. But it was sort of grating on me because it was like every time we took him, he would just gripe and whine about these cleats, and it was so frustrating. And I remember one day he was in the car again, and I had scooped him out and tied him on him again, and he's just like, no, it just feels weird. He's whining, and I was just like, I'd had enough, and I was just like, can we be done? Can we be done with the cleat conversation? Okay, we've brought it up like 5.7 million times, and it is driving me crazy. Can we be done with it? And I thought that was the end of it. And those of you that know my kids know that was not the end of it. Immediately, a cleat flies up into the windshield, and I hear him loudly from the back seat. He's like, we can't be done with it because these cleats are horrible. No one listens to me. My whole foot's gonna fall off. Because apparently some people in my family like to exaggerate things in order to make a point. I don't know where he gets it. But he flipped out. And so I'm like, just hold on, we'll get there, we'll deal with it, we get there. And I sit down with him, and I take his sock off, and it was nasty, and looked at his foot, and he had this weird little blister on his foot. And I took the cleat, and I turned it inside out, and I'm shining a flashlight in there, and there's this little piece of plastic that was peeking up in the cleat right where the thing was, and I was like, ooh. And I had that moment where it was just like, call CPS. I should not be raising children. I'm the worst parent ever. This whole time I've just been like, deal with it, get over it. It's in your mind, it's in your imagination. And he really had this little thing that was just ruining it. We got him some new cleats. It was weird. It was like a miracle. He stopped griping after that. It was so bizarre that once we actually addressed the issue, he stopped whining about it. And I bring this up because I think that you have been here with somebody or some situation in your life before, with someone that was, you're involved with, and they keep bringing up the same frustration or annoyance that they're having again and again and again and again, and you're trying to be like a good friend or a good parent or a good neighbor, and the first time they're just like, this is going on, and you're just like, oh man, and you're empathizing, you're like, that's such a bummer, oh. And then, and then the next 5 times, you're just like, oh, and you're trying to still be sympathetic, and you're trying to support them, and then you start making suggestions, and the 7 or 8 times after that, and you're like, what about this, and what if you tried that, and is there a way I could help you, could I sign you up for a thing, and they keep saying it, and about the 87th time, right, finally there's something that just sort of sweeps over you that's just like, okay, what do I have to do to not hear about this anymore? I wonder if you've hit this wall before. Don't nudge the person beside you if it's with them, because it's just, you're going to talk about that on the way home regardless, right? But you hit that wall of what? I will do anything. I will pay any amount of money. I will do anything. What do I have to do to not hear about this anymore? Because it is driving me crazy. And the truth is, some of us hit this wall a little sooner than others. Right? We sort of skip over the listening, empathy, helping them part. We're just like, other people's problems are annoying. And that's because you have a condition called being a jerk. And so you need to work on that. Too quick, right? However, even the most compassionate and caring and tender-hearted, helping people among us can eventually hit this place. And then it creates weirdness, right? We start dreading being around them. Like, oh man, I gotta go. They're going to be there, and I know exactly how they're going to be. And we start avoiding them, and it creates this sort of space between us and them because they just exhaust us. And there's actually a term for this thing of finding yourself in this state. It's called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue. And it's essentially an exhausted inability to feel or act empathetically toward another person due to the quantity or frequency of sustained care requested or required of them. Right? It's just like they're hitting you up over and over again, or the thing that they need or that you feel like they need from you is so consistent that you are just drained from it. And here's the heartbreaking reality behind this thing. Being too exhausted to address someone else's needs doesn't eliminate the existence of those needs. And that creates a certain relational tension between us and other people. Because it's very real that you're like, I am so sick of hearing about this, and it is wearing me out, and I'm tired, and I don't know what to do anymore. And it's also real that they're like, and I still have the same need. It still hasn't been remedied. It's still something that needs to be addressed. It's still dragging on. That's why I keep bringing it up. And sometimes that complicated space in between creates problems for us. And a lot of us, we don't know what to do with this. And it happens with a lot of people who are, in situations where they're in close proximity with people dealing with chronic issues in their life, whether that is like elongated bouts of sickness or physical disabilities or mental health issues like deep into depression or steady situational or societal obstacles like discrimination or poverty or unemployment. These things continue to drag on, and it can feel exhausting to provide support or to even be asked for that support. And often our exhaustion over time pushes us to this place of, can we just be done with this? Like, can we just be done? Can we move on? Can you snap out of it? Can you get over it already? Like, at the very least, can we stop talking about it all the time? And some people do stop talking about it, whatever the thing is. But the issue still remains, because being silent about something isn't the same as solving it. Like, just because you stop talking about it or ignore it doesn't mean it doesn't still exist. And what I've found is that people continue to complain about issues that they see as still unresolved. Like, this may sort of blow your mind, but sometimes when we're the one feeling annoyed by something, we're just like, they're doing this to annoy me, right? Where they've been plotting of like, how could I ruin her life, right? But in reality, people often bring up things over and over again because they're still in the middle of it. At least in their mind and their experience, it's still something that has no resolution. And so they're still bringing it up to try and figure out what to do in the midst of it. And no matter how much we wish that this wasn't true, no matter how much it's inconvenient for other people, it's something that still exists. And we get that, it doesn't really make sense for us to tell someone to like snap out of it when it's an issue from like the neck down, right? But from the neck up, we think about things very differently. I mean, think about how absurd this sounds. Like, imagine somebody in your family and you just went to them and you're like, you know what, I just got to be honest with you. It's finally time to have this confrontation. Your diabetes is so annoying. It is so, like, we're having to adjust everything. The cooking schedule is different. You know how much insulin costs? And you're doing it every day, and I can't do this, and I got to check my blood. It's so frustrating. And we took a vote in the family, and you know what? Snap out of it, okay? We all voted you need to be done with the diabetes, okay? Because it is driving us crazy. Doesn't make any sense. You know what's really annoying? You know what's really been inconvenient for us? When you stopped using your legs due to that horrific accident that paralyzed you from the waist down. It has rearranged our entire lives. We're having to do so many different things. So many things take longer. We've had to add on to the house and this and that. And we get it. And so we just decided, can you snap out of it? Can you just start walking again and using your legs? Because that would really help. Like, now, as I'm saying this, there's part of you that is just like, you feel so sick and uncomfortable. Your buttocks are clenching. You're just like, that is inappropriate. You can't say that. That's absurd. It's insensitive. And it is. But a lot of times we say the same sort of stuff to people who are suffering from some form of mental illness that we would never say to someone who is suffering from another form of like physical illness. We don't see the absurdity in it. And let me tell you something that you probably don't want to hear. many long-term biologically based conditions can't be cured, they must be managed. And that's annoying because we'd rather just eliminate something immediately than have to deal with it daily. But just because you'd prefer something doesn't make it a possibility. And this is definitely the case with severe depression. And a big reason is because, depression has a lot to do with your biological makeup. And yours is not the same as everyone else's. No matter how much you'd like to, you can't just sort of sit down one day and make a decision to just magically snap your fingers and have a different brain and body. Instead, you're going to have to learn about and work with and care for the one you've got. And that is a long-term project, which frustrates people in a culture who are obsessed with overnight miracle cures. And this provides a dilemma for us. Now, depression, just to give you like a bigger picture of sort of how this thing works the best I can, depression is the result of a deficit in a combination of three basic categories, okay? And we have made this like really clever triangular thing to sort of like illustrate this for you. But it's essentially a combination of a deficit in the areas of like nature, nurture, and neighborhood. Now let me describe like what I mean by these sorts of things. So nature, right? Your biology and your brain chemistry has a huge impact on your disposition and the way that you approach life. Like the imprint on your genetics, right? Like the family history and what has happened in them gets passed down and imprinted on you. The sort of your default personality. All of these things that are sort of bundled and come prepackaged. And yet some of these things actually are movable within a range. And yet you did inherit a certain set of tendencies. And those things are affected and impacted by nurture, right? By our habits and our history, by the way we grew up, by the things that happened to us when we were younger, by the different experiences we've had, how those things have turned on or off the different things that are active in our biology, right? And like the different habits, the things that we do, the way that we approach our life, the way that we think, all of these different things impact and affect our biology. And then there's the area of neighborhood, not necessarily the physical neighborhood. There's not like a zip code that's like, sorry, you moved into the wrong place. Everyone there is going to be depressed. What I mean by that is like people and proximity. So really people and places. So the people that are in our orbit, like they impact us. They rub off on us. The environments we find ourselves in, those things affect and impact us. Those things shape and reshape and affect our biology and our brain chemistry. And all of these sorts of things work together to create the way that we experience the world. And that means that if we are going to actually move forward to get better, to experience some form of relief or recovery, we have to address all of these things in our lives. And I want to peel them apart a little bit more, but I want to just sort of pause and show you from this story in the Old Testament about this prophet who sort of suddenly drops into this deep depression, because it happens to spiritual people too. The surprising ways in which God sort of points him in a direction to help him begin to tunnel out. And it's found in the book of 1 Kings chapter 19. And so if you have a Bible, you can flip there, or we're going to put on the screen as well. And I want to give you some background first. It's a story about this guy named Elijah, and he's a prophet. So it's a fancy way of saying like he spoke on behalf of God. And so God would speak to him and give him messages for the people. And the story sort of begins with him predicting that there's going to be a drought, and then it actually happens. And this is what, ensures that you're a prophet, not just a crazy person, right? Because it actually has to come true, the thing that you say and predict. And so it does. And of course, it throws the people into panic, and there's a lot of suffering as a result of this thing. And so Elijah reinserts himself back into the picture at God's command, and he's like, let's do this contest to see whose God, your God or my God, is powerful enough to actually pull us out of this drought again. So he holds this contest, and both groups of people, they call fire from heaven, and the first thing, it doesn't happen, and Elijah's classy, so he's like, maybe your God's in the bathroom. It's a great story. He's mocking them. And then he prays. It's like a one-sentence prayer. A fireball falls out of heaven, burns up the altar, the bull on the altar, all this stuff. And then everyone's like, whoa, you have the one true God. And then he picks up this sword, and he like kills all the prophets of the false god. It's like this horrible, like crazy 300 Rambo sort of scene. And then after all that happens, he's just like victory. He's on top of the world. And then he gets this message that the evil Queen Jezebel wants him dead. And immediately he panics and he runs away and becomes suicidal. And this is where we picked this really fun story up. 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 3, it says this. Elijah was afraid and he fled for his life. And then he went alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life, for I'm no better than my ancestors who already died. He just wants to be done. He wants to be done with his life. He's bottoming out. It sounds a lot like depression. And what I think is interesting is that it's like a lot of depressive episodes, even ones that last a really long time, it's triggered by this certain set of circumstances, but it's disproportionate to the circumstances because he already had everything needed to be a deep-end depressive, and everything begins to tip him in that direction, and he falls into it hard, and he just wants to die. And the big question here is, like, how is God going to respond to this? Like, what is God going to do or say in this situation? He's going to tell him, like, well, you should pray harder. You should have more faith. Maybe memorize a few more Bible verses. Maybe try telling the devil, no, not today. Okay, maybe try that one. What is God going to tell him to do? And what actually happens is really interesting. Verse 5 says this. Elijah lay down and slept under a tree. And then an angel touched him and told him, get up and eat. And that's the spiritual advice. Doesn't sound super spiritual, does it? And I think this is partially because we need to expand our definition of what is spiritual. An angel. Imagine this for just a minute. How many of you have seen an angel in person in the flesh? Probably not many of us. And how many of you, you're like, an angel, what message do you have for me? And he's like, you should really eat something. That's the message. God sent an angel to tell him, you should eat something. Like the angel is suggesting that Elijah address his emotional problem by caring for his physical body. Interesting. Why would he tell him that? Because some mental and emotional breakthroughs require you to first address physical issues because you're an integrated being. And I wonder if this has ever been a dialogue between you and God. Maybe you didn't go through an angel. Maybe just gave you a sense of something, right? Where you're like, God, you got to help me. You got to help me do this thing. You got to intervene. You got to work a miracle in my life. And he was like, I will. And then he responded by telling you to do something that felt really basic and you were offended. You were like, God, you got to help me with my constant exhaustion. God, you got to help me. And God is like, I will. Why don't you start by setting your phone down and going to bed earlier? And we're like, I don't really want to. Just looking for more like a miracle sort of a thing. I don't want to do that. God, you got to help me with my anger issues. And God's like, I know I do, and I will. And so let's just start by maybe lowering your sugar intake and eating some protein in the afternoon. We're like, I don't really want to do that. God, you got to help me with my anxiety. I will. And what I want you to do is I want you to start by actually moving out and not living in a house with somebody who is verbally and physically abusive, because that's going to keep your anxiety on edge. God, I need you to give me the will to live. And God's like, I will. I want that for you. Start by seeing a doctor and finding out what's going on with you. And maybe if there is something that you need to take to level your brain chemistry. And we're like, I don't want to do that. make an appointment, and then you got to go there and talk to the person, and like, it'd be so convenient if you just worked the miracle. Isn't it weird, like, how God always involves us in our own transformation? Wouldn't it have been just as easy for God to send an angel, and the angel's like, wake up, while you were sleeping, I miraculously, surgically filled your belly with everything you'll need for the journey ahead. He doesn't do that. He gives him some instruction to take care of his own body. And here's why this happens in this story, and a lot of Bible stories, honestly, is that the different dimensions of life aren't isolated, they're integrated. In other words, like when it comes to this subject that we're talking about, because depression is a whole person affliction, recovery requires a whole person approach. We like to sort of segment off things and just be like, this part of my being has nothing to do with this part of my being. But we can't do that. That's a Western concept that just isn't real. Like, all of these things are integrated and make up who we are. And once you wrap your head around this reality, you realize how brilliant the angel's instructions are in Elijah's story. That he's just like, listen, I know that you're wanting to address this. In order to deal with that, you're going to have to deal with this. You're going to have to start here in order to get to here. It goes on to say in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 6, that Elijah, the angel wakes him up, he looks around, and there beside his head was some fresh baked bread on hot stones and a jar of water, which is, it's bedside service. It's catering at its finest. What does bread taste like that was cooked by an angel? I don't know. Or maybe I do, Gretchen. She's not even in here. Come on. Somebody get her. We'll do it again. No, I'm just kidding. Then it says that he ate and he drank and then he laid back down and went to sleep again. Man, this is some deep in depression. Have you ever just woken up and you're like, oh, I should do something. I'm hungry. And you just sort of grab a handful of Doritos off the nightstand and wash it down with a liquid. You're not even sure what it is. You know what I mean? It was just there from 2 nights ago. And then you're like, that's enough for today. And then you just go back to, that's what this guy's doing. You're in a rough place. Verse 7, it says, the angel of the Lord came again and touched him and said, get up and eat some more, or the journey ahead will be too much for you. Now, this happens over and over and over again. It's like this repetitious cycle. And I don't think that it calls our attention to that on accident. I think that the repetition is important because he doesn't just get one good night of sleep, he gets multiple. He doesn't just eat one healthy meal to fuel his body, he has multiple. There is a rejuvenation rhythm that's being established here that really hasn't existed in his life for a little while. Because if you rewind his story and go into the scenes that happened right before this moment, he's so fixated on a goal that he has that he's just sort of trashing his body. He's letting his anxiety get the best of him. He's ramping up to these crazy situations. And he's not paying attention to how, the toll that it's taking on him. It says in the very next verse, verse number 8, so he got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. So he goes on this really long hike to this out-of-the-way place where he can just sort of be with God, where he can connect with God in this moment. And it takes him 40 days and 40 nights to get there. Some of us were like, God, that is way too long. I got to work again on Monday, so. Now, think about our categories, like nature, nurture, neighborhood, as it relates to what God tells Elijah to do to fight his depression. He's like, hey, sleep, eat, drink, hike, right? These are things that are addressing his nature, his biology. Because you're going to need your brain functioning correctly, and these are the things that physically will do that in order to actually move forward and have what you need chemically to move forward. Then he pulls him out of his normal routine, which is not working for him, and he establishes this new sort of rhythm of healthy habits that he has him repeat over and over and over again. And some of you are like, I could build new habits if I had a angelic life coach. That's not even fair. And I'll give you that. It takes 40 days, not overnight, a long period of time to dive into this stuff. And then God tells him in the very next section of Scripture that, listen, to move forward in your life, you're going to have to partner with someone else. And he tells him to go recruit this kid, Elisha, so that he can face what life is going to throw at him in front of him. In other words, he's like, you need to address your neighborhood. You went away from the crazy chaos, and now you need to put some people around you to help you manage the chaos within you. One thing I love about this story is that God never demeans Elijah for being in a dark place, and he never rushes him to get out of it. And maybe for some of you, that sort of blows your mind because you're like, that's not the impression I had at all of what God wanted for me. But the reality is, the pressure to snap out of it that we feel, it doesn't come from God, but from the personalities and the societal pace that surrounds us. See, the reality is God is way more patient than people. And if we're feeling the pressure of like, I got to snap out of this now, like just let off the steam of feeling like that maybe God is doing that to you. God is interested in walking it out with you, and this is a process. And the work you may need to do just to be able to function may be different and more than what somebody else has to do. And I get that that doesn't feel fair, and it's not. But what's normal for other people is not your benchmark. I love this set of instructions that one of the early followers of Christ gives to the early church about sort of how to navigate their lives and the conflict and the emotional and mental toil that they're experiencing. He says this in Galatians chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. I'll read this in the Message. It says, make a careful exploration of who you are and the work you've been given, and then sink yourself into that. Don't be impressed with yourself. Don't compare yourself to others. Each of you must take responsibility for doing the creative best you can with your own life. Interesting, right? Explore who you are, not who somebody else is, not what somebody else is doing. Identify the work that you need to do on yourself, on your life, on your circumstances, on your health. And sure, other people may not have that issue. Other people may not have to take those meds. Other people may not have to address those traumas in their life. Other people may not have to work as hard on those particular patterns, but they're not you. And trust me, they are doing their own work. They got their own stuff to wrestle to the ground. And you're not responsible for them. You're responsible for you. So do the creative best you can with your life. Like, you know when I tell my kids, like, to do the creative best they can? Like, oftentimes when we're playing Legos and they can't find the piece they want, like, I don't have all the right pieces. And I'm just like, do the creative best you can. You ever looked at your own life and just thought, like, I see what they're doing and accomplishing. I'm not sure I'm working with all of the same pieces. And your Father is saying the same thing to you. You're not. Do the creative best you can with your life. It is not a race between you and them. And so what work do we need to do? That's the question, right? And I would pose it to you, regardless of where you are on this spectrum, like which aspect of your mental or emotional health might you need to explore and address? And this could be different for all of us depending on where we're at and how rough it is and how dark of a place we find ourselves in. What does this actually look like? If we go back to this triangular thing here, some things that may affect and impact the nurture, the biology and brain chemistry part of it. Some of us are at a place where we need to go see a doctor. We need to see what medication we might need to take to balance some deficiencies in our brain chemistry. We may need to adjust our nutrition. We may need to eat differently because we are not giving our body what it needs to actually function correctly. We may need to exercise because we're cooped up and we're not utilizing our body and releasing the natural chemistry that it needs by actually moving yourself. We're not getting sunshine. We're not getting enough sleep. And so we actually need to put some attention into the type of sleep we're getting and our sleep routine so that we're actually fueling our body the way we need to. Some of us, we need to address things in the nurture category. Like we've got some trauma that from our past that is influencing how we make every decision in the present, and we're not even aware of it, or we don't want to deal with it, or we've never addressed it or processed through it. Some of us have certain triggers that when certain things happen, we bottom out. And other people in our life are starting to become aware of what those things are, and we haven't done enough self-work to know what they are or how to handle them, how to mitigate those moments in our own lives. For some of us, it's an issue of values. Like we've set our sights on achieving things that are not going to bring us happiness, and we run so hard after certain things, and it just makes us bummed because it can't deliver the kind of fulfillment that we're searching for. For some of us, it's certain patterns or habits, ways of doing things. For some of us, it's our self-talk. It's these looping thoughts that we've never isolated and addressed and worked at sort of uprooting. For some of us, it's neighborhood work, right? It's the people, places, the things. It's like we need to address all the nouns in our lives, right? It's like, man, these people over here, like when I spend time with them, they drag me down. They actually push me over the edge. Like they like trigger so many things for me. They push me into sort of spiraling self-talk patterns, right? There are other people that are uplifting, and we need to be around them more. There are certain places that we should go, and other places that are just like, man, we shouldn't go. They're not good for us, and it's a lot. And as you stare at this list, there is this sense of like overwhelmingness because this is addressing your whole person. But I hope when you look at this, there is this sense of like, oh, that's why you can't just snap out of it. Because there's a whole lot more going on here than just one simple decision. And sometimes we're stuck because we don't really want to address anything. Sometimes we're stuck because we are addressing the wrong things. Sometimes it's that we're not addressing enough things. And sometimes it's that we're addressing the right things and enough of them, but we didn't do it for long enough for it to actually make a difference. My kids are always like, I ate one salad, Dad. I don't feel better. I was like, you know what? I think it takes more than that. So how many push pops did you eat? Oh, they're outside again. Okay. Again, this is a process, and it takes time. It's not instantaneous. And it's not the same process for everyone. People wrestling with depression are having different experiences on different levels for different reasons. But here's what you can do. In the famed words of the great theologian, Dr. Leo Marvin from What About Bob? Baby steps, okay? Baby steps. And here's what I mean by that. You are not going to be able to snap out of it, but you can take a small step forward. And so what is that for you? You can take one small step, followed by another and another and another. But you don't need to think about all the steps right now. Just taking the first one. And the reality of it is going to be a journey, and it may take the whole of your life to complete it. You may never rid yourself completely of depression, but you can be better than you are now. Like the honest truth is that you may never be able to fully defeat depression, but you can keep it from fully defeating you. And I waited till the third week to let you know that the whole series is false advertising. Because we just want to like quickly find out some tactics to be done with something forever. But real deep in depression isn't something that is instantaneously cured. It is something that is ongoingly managed. One day at a time, one step at a time, at nobody's pace but your own. And I'll be real with you guys. If we go back to this triangle and you look at all the stuff that is listed here, I do all these things. I've had issues with depression since I was 21 years old. I'm going to dive more into my story next week, but like I take medication, I work on my nutrition, I exercise every single week. I try and get out and get sunshine. I sleep with a sleep contraption because I have a sleep disorder. I have to process my trauma in therapy. I got to go over my triggers. Gretchen and I always have to talk about our values. I have to constantly look at like the patterns that I slowly drift back into old things that don't work for me. Self-talk is a big thing. If you go in my office, I have like little sticky notes and things written on the wall to remind me of like not automatic ways of thinking. I have to size up the people and the places and the things that I put around me and hold close, and there are times where I have to readjust those boundaries. And even though I do all these things, I still have bad days. I still have bad weeks. I still have bad months. I manage it. But here's the thing. I am better than I have been. And there is hope. I got to tell you, if you find yourself frustrated with the people around you, annoyed or angry that they're struggling harder than you and it's taking longer than you want them to, I want to just read you something else. A charge that Paul gives the people of God right after he tells them that they need to work on their own lives at their own pace. He goes on to say this, Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. He says, let us not allow ourselves to get fatigued doing good. Interesting that the translator selected that word. At the right time, we'll harvest a good crop if we don't give up or quit. Right now, therefore, every time we get a chance, let's work for the benefit of all, starting with the people closest to us in our community of faith. And what he's saying is that, although you're going to have to do your own work that nobody can do for you, we are made to lean in and help and support one another. What God wants to do in you and through you, you cannot do on your own. And some of us are going to have to slow our pace and sort of adjust our expectations so that we have the time and the margin to lean in and actively care about the people around us who God put us in proximity to in order to help lift them up and put them on the path to healing. I want you to know that, if you're in a place where, like Elijah, it just feels like the lights are going out. And like him, he keeps repeating these phrases over and over again, essentially saying, everything is hopeless. And I'm all alone. And I'm going to die. And it's not until he begins to start addressing some of these biological issues that he gets enough clarity that God is able to speak the truth into his life and tell him, it's not hopeless. There actually are solutions. Just because you can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist or are being activated right now. You're not alone. He tells him that there's actually 7,000 people waiting for him back where he came from to partner with him to move forward. And God reminds him, your brain edited out all the support you actually have because you are so in the dark. I just want to tell you that if you are in that place, that there are a lot of people in your spiritual community that love you, care about you, that want to support and help you, even though your brain may be editing that out in this moment. Take the first baby step and get help. Would you bow your heads across this room? I just want to pray into your life today that God would help you to do this in your world. God, thank you so much for the life that you've given us, for the hope and love and care that you've given us for your word, which gives us insight into who we're made to be and to how to live life to the full. God, so many of us, we feel so dragged down by so many things in our lives, and we need your help. We feel like things are hopeless. We feel like we are all alone, and we feel the pressure to sort of snap out of it. God, I pray that you would communicate to us that pressure is not coming from you, and in fact, that you want to take us on a journey of holistically addressing everything that is dragging us down and holding us back. And then although it may not be something that you completely lift off our shoulders in this lifetime, that we can and will get better. And God, I pray that you would give us enough sense of hope to just take the next step, followed by the next and the next and the next. And God, I pray that those of us who are in a season of feeling energized and feeling hopeful, God, I pray that we would be those who gather around and support and champion those who are not. That we'd be your community of people leading each other toward hope. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.